Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of We Hunt Together. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with Lola and Jackson. I love, I do love that we do get finally a resolution to the whole scratching thing, because obviously Jackson's worried because we find out that Lola kind of dropped the whole therapy thing, which I guess shouldn't be too much of a surprise. God knows how long ago she dropped it, but the whole constant scratching, Jackson's worried that she's going back to using it again. But it's like, no, it's because she's gotten fleas from the cat. It's like, right, you wanted a more humane way of getting rid of the mice. Well, now I got fleas because you didn't tell me about that aspect of getting a cat. I was like, oh, I love that. That's what that was about. I was like, I was wondering if that was something, because even he's like, oh, could it be, well, a combination of could she be using again, but also could it be stress from the Freddy just the Freddy of it all. But it's like, no, it's just she's got a whole bunch of fleas all over herself from everything going on. Also, Eve, the actress who plays Lola, I love her facial expressions. They're so good when Jackson tries to give her the meditation app, and she tries it later on, and it's telling her to hold her breath. It's like, hold, and she's looking like, thanks, fuck no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm like, I love her facial expression. When Susan's telling them, right, you're gonna have to find some more evidence, you just see her eyes kind of widen. It's like, she's really good at just really expressing herself a lot as this character, and I love that. Well, I'm not familiar with a lot of her work, so because I don't think she did a lot of that. I think that is a very Lola thing, because I don't remember her doing that. As to be fair, it's been a while since I've seen Torchwood, but I don't remember her doing that as was it Gwen? Was that her character? Once again, it's been so long since I've seen Torchwood. But regardless, they end up going to see Robert, who just screams oh, I'm suspicious, because he's like, oh, I went walking for a while, he's like, oh, where'd you go? He's like, not really sure. Part of his way of decompressing. But once again, I think it's such an interesting thing that, and maybe it just plays into Jackson himself, but him always being so friendly with people, like him and Freddy last season, and even this season, and then him and Robert, it's like, oh, you make good work, and even commentating on life, it's like, oh yeah, it kind of reminds him, he's like, it reminds me of an England that was kind of a little more greenish, and just Lois looking at him and Robert's like, yeah, I really appreciate that you look at my work like that, thinking it's pretty good. He's like, yeah, if you want a piece, you could have it. It doesn't matter which one. It's like, yeah, it's cops, they can't take gifts because it could be misconstrued as a bribe, so it's like, no. But Robert just screams guilty, but like I said in the first episode, he seems too obvious. It seems like it's all pointing towards him, so I'm like, it can't be him. He's got to be the red herring. Well, we find out in this episode he super was the red herring, but I brought it up in the first episode, my mind was split between 3 suspects, so he's kind of removed from the board. There's still 2, but we'll kind of get to that. But yeah, he's making it seem like, oh yeah, I remember Freddy, but I met her at the speed dating thing. It's like, whoa, had you seen her beforehand? He's like, yeah, why would I have? Trying to pretend like he doesn't know. Because generally, most people are going to know what Freddy's whole circumstances are, because it's such a public thing, and it's only been 10 months. It's a pretty big event, and it stays in the news cycle, not just because everything's Freddy up to, it's also because Shannon from Yours Truly just constantly, which I'm saying that, and I think that's funny, because I think there's a band called Yours Truly, isn't it? I think so. I think it's a common enough phrase, but I think, there's is it a British band, or is it just maybe it's an American band? I feel like there's a band called Yours Truly. There's an Australian band called Yours Truly. Granted, I also, when I was Googling it, there's restaurants and stuff, so it's a common enough thing, but I feel like I remember there being a band called Yours Truly. Tangent and all that aside. But I just, you can't escape it. It was kind of the whole point. So him trying to pretend oh, he has no idea just makes him that much more suspicious. But obviously, they don't really have enough to fully... Yes, they've got Robert's fingerprint on the coin, but it's all not enough evidence to really ask for a warrant and to be able to search. So it's you have to fully connect Robert to either I was about to call him Simon, to... God, I'm actually blanking on the victim's name, because when I'm thinking Simon, I think of the first victim in the first season. But it's either connecting him to the first victim of this season, or connecting him to Freddie and all that, but haven't been able to fully do that. So they're kind of in a tougher spot in that regard. Other elements, let's switch over to Freddie. Now that she's gotten her admirer's letter last episode, it's so interesting. She was sitting down with Liam, and he's asking her about like the whole Simon thing, and I thought it was so interesting that she made the approach of, taking the letter about the bee, the spider, and the bird. I don't know. I think that was just her being cheeky because she has that metaphor in her head, so she was just doing that. But part of me was almost wondering, like, is she testing the waters to see if he would say anything? Because she probably figures, well, I guess she probably figures whoever it is has to be someone she doesn't know, or maybe it is someone she's come across she's crossed paths with. But I don't know if she's immediately thinking like, oh, it is Liam or anything like that. I think she was just being cheeky about like, oh, there's this new metaphor I have. And she used it to kind of describe the whole thing with Simon, because his point was, were you angry with Simon? Did you want revenge? She's like, no, I wasn't angry. It's like, why would I be angry with him? It's like, he was trying to assault you, right? And so it's like, even Liam's like, wait, are you trying to say like men are more inclined to like assault women, so why get... She's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. She's like, he was following his impulses. So kind of almost like, it's almost like using the metaphor of like the scorpion and the frog. It's like, right, it's in the scorpion's nature, so you can't fault it for doing what it did. That's your fault. So it's almost, it was a weird thing, because that's why even Liam was like, wait, what? You might want to like clean that up a little bit with the way she phrased it. She's like, yeah, why would I get, it's like, right, that was his impulse along with Bubba's impulse, and now they're both dead, so whatever. I'm like, okay. And then you could also tell Liam's a little off because he's paying attention to her computer. He tried to walk away with her key. In fact, he took a mode of, I'm assuming, the key to her flat. So I'm like, yeah, he definitely seems uber suspicious. He seemed uber suspicious last episode. We also learned an interesting detail. Her neighbor Diane, Freddie's neighbor Diane, never actually saw the person who came in with a delivery for Freddie, but she was doing yoga, so she happens to see their shoes through the dog door. It's red shoes, which later on we see, lo and behold, it is Liam, which I'm like, okay, so they're setting that up. So either that's going to be like no, it definitely is Liam, or that's insinuating like, no, Liam dropped it off. Yeah, he had some part to play in this, but maybe he's not the killer that... Maybe he's not... I think it just seems a little... It might be a situation of he happens to be wearing red shoes, but he's not... he could be the second red herring. I don't know. Because once again, it's just like the fact is they give you that detail so early on. I don't know. To be fair, the killer later on wants to meet with Freddy, so maybe by next episode we'll fully find out who they are. Once again, it's still a toss-up for me. Having not seen the third episode yet, and that's just pure speculation on my part, I'm assuming it's still a toss-up for me between Henry and Liam. But Shannon's doing her usual thing, kind of throwing Freddy under the bus. And I do like, drawing... just from a cinematography standpoint, I just thought that was like, oh, I loved how that was filmed, where she's breathing on the glass and she makes the eyes, and then from the outside, like where the camera's looking in, like you see her head tilt and it lines up perfectly with the eyes. I was like, oh, I like that. Nice touch. But we do see, and I think we're going to finally, because that was a big mystery we never got the end result for last season. We're getting answers for it this season, I'm assuming, because we saw Freddy when she was younger locked up somewhere, and someone was throwing something in there towards her, and we see her hands. That must have been something post her being at that school. No, because it had to be her, because she went to juvie for 5 years, so I'd assume that had something to do with like either kind of like, not necessarily the warden, but one of the main guards of kind of nurse / guards of that facility that probably like checked in on the patients from time to time. That was probably the person with those particular tattoos, and so that was a very significant portion of her life. She was in the juvie for like 5 years, so it probably stuck with her. So she was already kind of like a disturbed kid to some extent, and I'm sure that time there just escalated that, because who knows what the fact is she's keeping those I mean, it makes sense because, like, right, apparently, like, anytime they pushed her food in there, like a jail or whatever, that person's arms or whatever would go in there, and those eyes would be the things you saw. It's, like, probably the only characteristic she ever really got to know of that person for probably maybe all of her time there, or maybe just some of it. So there's some significance there. We're going to have to wait to kind of find out about it. Which I love the symbology and just like the thing of like, oh, there's so many symbolizations of things because there's still the teddy bear. There's no DNA or anything on it, but obviously the killer left it there on purpose after taking a ring finger, which I'm like, for a second, I'm like, who did, if you've ever seen the show Van Helsing, because like, there was like some serial killer in something that took fingers, and it's like, okay. I mean, like, obviously, like, that's a trophy thing, because I obviously like Dexter and the blood, slabs and stuff, but also, but yeah, the fingers thing was, either way, going back to it, Shannon, and Freddy actually meet, and I love that back and forth. Both of them did a lot of shit talking, like, Freddy talking about like, oh shit, well, Shannon's kind of being a clout chaser, being like, oh, basically almost like we fling shit at each other and we both come out more amazing because it's like, right, you come onto my platform, it keeps you in the news cycle, and I stay relevant by talking about you, you stay relevant by coming onto my show, but Freddy kind of gets on her. It's like, oh, you have to wake up every morning to find something to be angry about because apparently she had like a basically almost like a pimp, like a house remake or something, garden type of remake show where it's like, oh, people go away, come back, she's remade their house, that type of show. But now she shifted into like kind of this online personality who kind of just basically yells and gets angry at everything. And I'm like, that's an interesting shift in your career, but it's like, I guess because the opportunities dried up and it's just like, this is the, because it gets the clicks and stuff like that. I'm sure part of me was almost like, is it supposed to be kind of like is she supposed to be like a British Alex Jones or something? Is that what they're kind of going for there? Because we have no idea what else she covers. She definitely talks about Freddy, but I think based on the way they talk about her later on, it seems like she talks about a lot of subjects with that same amount of venom. She's just kind of like a leechy person of just like, oh, I talk about this subject and I just find something to be angry about. And it's like, yes, we only focus on her obsession with Freddy, but it seems like she probably focused on other stuff too that just kind of like rubbed people the wrong way. So, but Freddy was talking to her like, right, you should walk away from this, stop talking about me and stuff. And then she basically said like, oh, you think I'm kind of trapped in my situations, like you are trapped too, that you're eventually, the world's going to move on and forget about you. And it's like, there is a part of Freddy that loves the attention. Like, I mean, maybe it's not all of her, but it's still a significant enough amount to the point which Shannon said cut deep because it bothered her of like, oh yeah, dying, alone. I wonder if, I doubt it, but there's a part of me wondering if like the whole Baba situation, like if her comments kind of brought that up a little bit of like, right, yeah, it's someone that you wanted to love and cared about that you still think about. So you potentially dying alone and not having anyone because she already feels like no one understands her to some extent. That's why I'm like, I wonder, did that play any role in cutting deep or just in general, all that Shannon said, so. And the moment, like, you could tell Freddy's like, oh, I'm warning you. And it's like, oh, what are you going to do? Sick your lawyers on me? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, no, I'm going to sick this killer that's obsessed with you. And she does. Puts out a message publicly being like, oh, she's such a spider. If only someone could set her free. And the killer rolls up and ends up killing her. I was kind of where I was like, okay, so how's this going to go? Killer basically had uploaded a video of like the whole thing to her channel, to Shannon's channel, and even had her go like, oh, I'm a spider with spinkly legs and yeah, ended up killing her, which is so sad because like the moment she had that argument with her daughter Maisie, I was like, oh yeah, she's gonna die. And I'm like, oh, it's gonna be such a shame you got into this argument with your mom, because even she's like, yeah, it's not just people online with the comments, it's like people at my school, everyone hates you. And she's like, well, everything I do is for you, me, and this house and the life that we live. But it's like, no, for a kid, it's like, yeah, like when your mom is probably one of the most hated people, it's like, that's not an easy thing to kind of just shrug off, especially at such a young age too. But it's like, yeah, just knowing that that's like one of the last things she ever said to her mom before her mom died, so. And by the time, obviously, the video went up, the killer made sure to upload the video after she had already died. So, because by the time Jackson calls Lola, they had already got her body out of the pool. So, some other elements I had skipped over. They were talking to Robert's, but I mean, I guess because it's kind of all moot points because Robert's not the killer, but it was still interesting. You could tell he was the perfect patsy because he was already a little off, and he was obsessed with Freddy to the point that, like, one of his coworkers was like, yeah, he was completely obsessed with her, only wanted to talk about her, and literally said the phrase, quote, I want to fuck that bitch to death, end quote. And you're like, Jesus. So, once again, it made him seem like the person, but it's like, right, he's just the perfect patsy to take the fall for that. I mean, at the very least, he was a stalker in his own right. He just happened to not be the other stalker that's stalking her, because the other stalker is, I mean, not unless that ends up being the twist where all three of them are stalkers. Both, I mean, Robert's one, Liam's definitely one, and I'm sure Henry is too. But I'm like, the three people, like, these three suspicious people in her life are probably all going to be stalkers, and only one of them is going to be the killer. Because Liam ended up showing up at Lola's place, and Lola's like, what are you doing here? How'd you get my address? She's like, well, actually, I followed you home, but not in a creepy way. She's like, which other way should I be taking it when you just randomly follow me home? But it's like, right. He said he's doing it for his job, but it's like, part of me is almost like, do you think is he going to try and, like, I was almost wondering, like, whether there was going to be, like, I think I brought this up last episode, wondering whether there was going to be a thing between him and Lola, which would be weird, sure, but I don't know if that, because he wants an interview with her so badly. He says this is just because he wants to get both sides of the story. He's getting Freddy's side, and he wants Lola's side of things, and I'm like, I guess because he's like, if I could get both sides of the story, that'll just kind of make this even juicier, because just getting Freddy's isn't enough. It's already out there, but getting Lola's, because probably hasn't really been able to get getting probably dual perspectives for the book and putting that together will probably make it even juicier and more tantalizing. That's how I justify. Or he's just being a creepo, and he's got Freddy's house key mode, so he's just gonna get that made. But also rolling up on Lola's place like that is pretty weird. Jackson did buy one of Robert's paintings and brought it home, and I was like. And his wife was kind of like, yeah, don't put that up. I don't think it's going to look good there. I don't like it at all. I just get rid of it. He's like, well, I'll put it in my office. She's like, no, get rid of it. And I'm like, well, for one, she doesn't know it was made by a particular suspected killer. And I'm like, why would that seem like such a weird reaction to that? If you're just kind of like, it's weird. But he's like, oh, yeah, I wanted to put it up as a gesture. And she's like, well, thank you for the gesture. I just don't like it. I'm like, I guess, like, maybe it just, like, she was just picking up the vibes from it, but, like, it just felt like, once again, it's like, a lot of Jackson and his wife's unresolved issues are there. Once again, I brought this up last episode, they made the whole point of, like, once the kids get older, go off to college, then we'll kind of find our way back to loving each other. It's like, we're going to have to wait, not only, it's definitely going to be 18 years, because that's when this new child is going to be born and old enough to move out in the house. So I'm like, yeah. You kind of set yourself up for that. So they're probably just like there's so much unresolved issues and resentment, and just there's just so much there that is like even in the first episode, the interactions, I'm just like, I don't know, man, because it's just Jackson doesn't like the confrontation of it all. But I think it's just his way of handling things isn't healthy either. So I don't know. Who knows if he's still like. He has his anger issues and stuff. We don't know if he still uses that room to like thrash around. We know he did it once, but we don't know. I don't think it's his like those rooms they have where you can like break shit. I don't think that's his continuous use room. It's just that's always beneath the surface. It's always bubbling there. But he just has this very happy-go-lucky exterior that he kind of exudes to the world. So we'll see what kind of goes down on that front, but. Speaking, I brought up Henry earlier. He did roll up at Frederica's place with a mask, and he's like, well, apparently, he's like, oh, you check on Amazon, like, people have already kind of bought it up. And then you saw this moment where Freddie found out, like, wait, Shannon had a daughter? I didn't know she had a daughter. It's like, well, why would you know that she had a daughter? It's like, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting that she was like, oh, I guess it's like, despite everything, she feels bad because, like, well, most of the people she killed, they might have, because none of the people last season had anyone like that. Like, Simon was kind of alone. Matt had a boyfriend, but, like, kids are a different thing. Finding out, and specifically her having a daughter, maybe, Freddie, Lily kind of like had some deeper connection with that and kind of felt bad. It's like, oh, I took some little girl's mom from her. It's like, well, I didn't really do it. But it seemed like she immediately got over it quickly. But even she was like, oh, I didn't know she was a mom. Like, maybe like knowing she was a mom ahead of time would have made her at least a little hesitant or she would have given Shannon more chances not to be a D-bag. So maybe that's what that kind of really comes down to. Either way, I mean, it's already done and she's kind of enjoying it. And, even Henry being like, oh yeah, like the irony behind it stuff. I was like, yeah, that kid doesn't seem well adjusted either. So, I mean, once again, it's like, you have to have like ulterior motives. Either you're obsessed with her because you believe she is the one responsible for killing your sister, so there's some twisted like love there because she's also using your sister's name. Like, maybe there's something there, like he is, like his obsession with her is his own thing. I did like the whole thing of like she was reading a comment and it ended up being a significant one because it was the one that stood out to me. I was like, oh, the title, that comment has the title of the show in it, We Hunt Together. But together ended up being like a hidden message. And I was like, oh, like she was like spider, try that as a password. I thought it was like, oh, it's going to be honeybee, isn't it? But it's like, no, it's try this. It was kind of written in a message. I was like, oh, I would think those are interesting with riddles and stuff or like secret things of like, oh yeah, the first letters of things. I always think that's fascinating. So the password ended up just being this. So Shannon is her spider, but I'm curious, are there going to be any other spider? Because my immediate thought from the first episode, I didn't think of Shannon. I immediately was like, oh, it's got to be Lola, right? But sure, there's plenty of spiders for this bird to come across. And I'm also stupid too. I completely didn't correlate. Oh, right, the killer's the bird in this metaphor, and the killer also wears a bird mask. It didn't even correlate in my head last episode. I didn't even piece that together because I'm an idiot. I didn't even think about that till the bird mask. I was like, bird mask. I was like, oh, right, that's where the whole bird thing comes into play. Okay. Then they end up going after Robert later because they end up finding his fingerprint in a chair. I'm like, and just like Lola being like, that's a little too easy. Like, the fact is, we wore gloves the first time during the crime. We only found the coins because that was outside of a criminal investigation. It's like, now we find his fingerprint. I mean, that seems a little uneasy. And then the moment that was all introduced, I was like, oh yeah, like he's got to be dead and they're framing him. And, well, at the very least, I figured he was being framed, and I figured they'd find him, like, dead by suicide and makes it seem like, oh, it's all wrapped up. I figured it'd be kind of that. But it's like, no, the killer left a message saying, poor Robert, try again, pigs, and has, like, left his finger there, so, which I should also point out, that scene with Freddy giving Liam that, ice where she's keeping the finger, I was like, that's gross. But, so, yeah, once again, removes Robert from the board. So, currently, the police have no other suspect. He was kind of like their main one. So, it kind of went all in on him. Once again, my suspects still bounce between Henry and Liam. So, we'll kind of have to wait and see where things go forward in that regard. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.